I own 40% of this company's shares," Marcus Taylor declared, his voice echoing through the store as security guards froze in place. The white store manager, who had handcuffed his 7-year-old daughter Zara, suddenly went pale. Her career was about to implode spectacularly. Before we dive into this shocking story of racial injustice and powerful consequences, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe no child should ever face discrimination, smash that like button and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Now let's rewind to see how this confrontation began. The morning had started so perfectly for 7-year-old Zara Taylor. After weeks of practice for her upcoming piano recital, her aunt Vanessa had promised to take her shopping for a special dress that would make her feel like a princess on stage. Zara had been looking forward to this day all week, bouncing with excitement as she and Aunt Vanessa entered the gleaming glass doors of Pinnacle Department Store in downtown Atlanta. The store was known for its upscale merchandise and exclusive clientele, with polished marble floors and elegant displays that made shopping feel like an event. Zara's eyes widened as they passed through the children's department, filled with beautiful clothes that seemed to sparkle under the carefully positioned lighting. "Remember, we're looking for something special, but not too fancy," Vanessa reminded her niece with a warm smile. "Your playing is what people should notice most." Zara nodded seriously, already scanning the racks with the intense concentration of someone with a very important mission. As they moved through the department, Zara was drawn to a glass display case near the accessories section. Inside was the most beautiful butterfly hairpin she had ever seen, its wings seemingly crafted from dozens of tiny crystals that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. "Aunt Vanessa, look at this," she gasped, pressing her small fingers against the glass. Vanessa checked the price tag and winced. "That's $200, sweetie. Way too expensive for an accessory. But we can find something similar that doesn't cost as much as our rent." Zara understood. Her father had taught her the value of money, even though they lived comfortably. "I just wanted to look at it," she said reluctantly, pulling herself away from the display after one last longing glance at the butterfly's sparkling wings. What Zara didn't notice as she moved away was the sharp gaze of Diane Reynolds, the floor manager, who had been watching her from behind a nearby clothing rack. Diane was 42 years old, with tightly pulled-back blonde hair and thin lips that seemed permanently set in a disapproving line. She had been working at Pinnacle for 11 years and had developed what she privately called a sixth sense for potential shoplifters. In reality, this sense was nothing more than deeply ingrained racial bias that caused her to scrutinize black customers with far more suspicion than others. As Zara and Vanessa continued shopping, Diane began to follow them, staying just far enough behind to avoid obvious detection. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Zara touch various items, convinced the child was looking for an opportunity to steal. Zara, sensitive and perceptive beyond her years, began to feel uncomfortable. "Aunt Vanessa," she whispered, tugging at her aunt's sleeve, "that lady keeps looking at us." Vanessa glanced around casually and spotted Diane quickly pretending to reorganize a display. "Don't worry about it, honey. She's probably just doing her job, making sure the store looks nice." But Vanessa felt a familiar unease settling in her stomach. As a black woman, she was all too familiar with being followed in stores, but she had hoped her niece wouldn't have to experience that particular indignity quite so young. They continued shopping, eventually finding 3 potential dresses for Zara to try on. Just as they were heading toward the fitting rooms, Vanessa's phone rang. She checked the screen and frowned. "I have to take this, Zara. It's work, and it's important." Vanessa was a real estate attorney in the middle of a complicated closing. "Can you wait right here for just 5 minutes? Stay by these chairs, okay?" Zara nodded, sitting down obediently with the dresses across her lap. "I'll be right over there," Vanessa said, pointing to a quieter corner of the store. "I can see you the whole time." As soon as Vanessa stepped away, Diane made her move. She strode directly to Zara, her low heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I need you to come with me right now." Zara looked up, confused and immediately anxious. "My aunt said to wait here. She's just over there." She pointed toward Vanessa, who had her back turned, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. "I saw what you did," Diane continued, ignoring Zara's explanation. "You took something from the display case. Empty your pockets right now." Zara's eyes widened in shock and fear. "I didn't take anything, I promise." Her voice rose in panic as tears began to form. Several shoppers nearby turned to look at the commotion. "Don't make a scene," Diane hissed, grabbing Zara's arm firmly. "Security is already on the way. This will be much easier if you just admit what you did." Zara began to cry in earnest now, her small body shaking with sobs. "I want my aunt. I didn't steal anything." But Diane was already pulling her toward the back of the store, past staring customers who whispered among themselves. One of them, Maria Gonzalez, a young Latina woman who worked in the women's department, watched with growing concern. She had seen Diane target black customers before and had always felt powerless to intervene. This time, though, it was a child, and something about the girl's genuine terror made Maria resolve to find a way to help. Jack Wilson, a security guard in his early 30s, met Diane and Zara at the entrance to the security office. He frowned slightly at the sight of the sobbing child. "What's going on?" he asked Diane. "Caught this one stealing a crystal hairpin from the display case," Diane replied confidently. "Worth $200. I saw her slip it into her pocket." Jack looked skeptical. "Did you actually see the item in her possession?" Diane bristled at the question. "I know what I saw. She had plenty of time to hide it somewhere or pass it to her aunt. Check her pockets and call the police. I want this handled by the book." Jack reluctantly led Zara into the small, windowless office. The room was intimidating by design, with bright fluorescent lighting and bare walls except for a security monitor and a poster outlining the store's zero-tolerance policy on theft. "Please sit down," he told Zara, his voice gentler than Diane's. "Can you tell me your name and your aunt's name, Zara Taylor?" she hiccuped through tears. "My aunt is Vanessa Porter. Please, I want my aunt. I didn't take anything." Jack nodded, uncomfortable with the situation, but following protocol. "We need to check your pockets, Zara. Is that okay?" Before Zara could respond, Diane interjected. "It doesn't matter if it's okay. This is a suspected theft. Check her pockets and then check those dresses she was holding. She probably slipped the pin in there." With shaking hands, Zara turned out her empty pockets. Jack then carefully checked the dresses, finding nothing. "See," Zara pleaded. "I told you I didn't take anything." Diane's face hardened. "She must have hidden it somewhere else or passed it to someone. Call the police. I'm pressing charges." Meanwhile, Vanessa had finished her call and returned to find the chairs empty, the dresses gone. Panic immediately set in as she scanned the area. "Zara," she called, moving quickly through the nearby racks. "Zara, where are you?" Several customers avoided her gaze, but one elderly white woman approached her. "If you're looking for a little girl in a purple shirt," that manager took her to the back. "She was accusing her of stealing something." Vanessa felt her heart drop. "What? That's ridiculous." She rushed toward the customer service desk, demanding to know where her niece had been taken. The associate looked uncomfortable, but wouldn't provide information. As Vanessa grew more desperate, Maria Gonzalez approached her carefully. "Your niece is in the security office," she whispered. "Diane Reynolds took her there. It's through those doors and to the left. I don't think she took anything. Diane does this a lot, especially with—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Vanessa understood exactly what she meant. With a quick thank you to Maria, Vanessa ran toward the security office, her mind racing. As she approached the doors, she pulled out her phone and dialed her brother-in-law's number. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. This was about a child being terrorized because of the color of her skin, and Vanessa knew exactly who needed to be called. Marcus Taylor sat at the head of the glossy conference table on the 42nd floor of the Genesis Technologies headquarters, listening intently as Chief Financial Officer Jonathan Pierce explained the projected quarterly earnings to a group of potential investors. At 45, Marcus cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his close-cropped hair showing distinguished touches of gray at the temples. As the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, he had built Genesis from a small startup operating out of his garage into a Fortune 500 company, employing over 3,000 people. Today's meeting was particularly important, with representatives from several international investment firms considering a significant stake in the company's newest division. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this presentation, knowing it could potentially take Genesis to the next level of global influence. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and he discreetly checked the screen, prepared to ignore the call. When he saw it was Vanessa, his sister-in-law, he frowned slightly. Vanessa never called during work hours unless it was an emergency. He excused himself with a brief apology to the room. "I need to take this. Please continue, Jonathan." The investors exchanged annoyed glances as Marcus stepped into his adjoining private office and closed the door. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" The panic in her voice made his blood run cold. "Marcus, it's Zara. We're at Pinnacle Department Store downtown, and they've taken her to the security office. They're accusing her of stealing some hairpin. She's terrified, Marcus. They called the police on her. On a 7-year-old, the manager, she's being horrible, I think. I know this is about race." Marcus felt a transformation overtake him, a cold fury building from deep within. His voice, when he spoke again, was dangerously calm. "I'm on my way. Do not let them question her without you present. Tell them her father is coming, and they will regret every second of this." He ended the call and returned to the conference room, his demeanor completely changed. The easy confidence had been replaced by something more primal, more powerful. Even the seasoned executives around the table sensed the shift and fell silent. "Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize, but I need to attend to an urgent family matter. My daughter is being wrongfully detained at a store downtown on suspicion of theft. As you can imagine, this requires my immediate attention." Patrick Donovan, a senior partner at a prestigious investment firm, looked irritated. "Mr. Taylor, we've flown in from across the country for this meeting. Surely someone else can handle a minor retail incident." Marcus fixed him with a gaze so intense that Donovan physically leaned back in his chair. "My 7-year-old daughter is being held in a security office and questioned by police because of the color of her skin. There is nothing minor about that, and there is no one else who can handle it with the same authority that I can." Jonathan will continue the presentation. "I trust that my company's 28% year-over-year growth speaks for itself. If that's not enough to hold your interest in my absence, then perhaps we're not the right partners for each other after all." Without waiting for a response, Marcus strode from the room, already pressing the intercom button for his executive assistant. Dominic Porter appeared at his side almost instantly, a tall, efficient man who had been with Marcus since the early days of the company. "I need the helicopter ready in 5 minutes. Zara's being detained at Pinnacle Department Store downtown. Call Sarah from legal and have her meet me there." Dominic, to his credit, didn't waste time with questions. "The helicopter will be ready in 3 minutes. I'll have James bring the car around to take you to the helipad now. Do you want me to call ahead to the store?" Marcus was already moving toward the elevator. I want the element of surprise. "But call William Marshall at the police department. Tell him what's happening and that I need his personal attention on this." William had been Marcus's friend since childhood, growing up in the same neighborhood before their paths diverged, William to law enforcement and Marcus to technology. Despite their different careers, they had maintained a close friendship, supporting each other through personal and professional challenges. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Marcus felt memories flooding back, memories he usually kept carefully locked away. He remembered being 16, saving for months to buy a pair of limited edition sneakers, only to have the store security follow him around until he left without buying anything. He remembered being in his 20s, a successful software engineer, being pulled over by police while driving his new BMW, ordered out of the car and handcuffed while they verified it wasn't stolen. He remembered just last year, even as the CEO of a billion-dollar company, being asked by a flight attendant in first class if he was sure he was in the right seat. Marcus had hoped, worked, sacrificed, and succeeded beyond what most would consider possible, all while telling himself that if he could just climb high enough, his daughter wouldn't have to face the same prejudices. Yet here she was at only 7 years old, already learning the harsh lesson that to some people, her achievements, her character, her very humanity, would always be secondary to the color of her skin. The thought made his jaw clench as the elevator doors opened. James was waiting with the car, and minutes later, Marcus was boarding the company helicopter, a sleek black Airbus H-160 with the Genesis Technologies logo emblazoned on the side. As the rotors began to spin, Marcus made two more calls. The first was to Zara Taylor, the company's chief legal counsel. "Sarah, my daughter Zara is being detained at Pinnacle Department Store downtown on a false accusation of shoplifting. I need you to meet me there immediately with whatever legal documentation you need to make them very, very sorry they ever laid a hand on her." Sarah's response was immediate and professional. "I'm on my way. I'll bring the full team and necessary paperwork for both criminal and civil actions. Don't let them question her without representation." The second call was to the company's media relations director, Alexis Washington. "Alexis, there may be a situation developing at Pinnacle Department Store involving my daughter. I need you to monitor social media and local news. If this goes public, we need to control the narrative. This is about racial profiling of a 7-year-old child." Alexis assured him she would handle it and would prepare a statement if needed. As the helicopter lifted off, Marcus stared out at the Atlanta skyline. In the 15-minute flight, he would transform from Marcus Taylor, accommodating businessman, to Marcus Taylor, father and warrior for justice, ready to bring the full weight of his influence down on anyone who dared to harm his person. "Child." The pilot's voice came through his headset. "ETA, 7 minutes to Peachtree Center, helipad, sir." Marcus nodded acknowledgement, his mind now fully focused on what awaited him. From above, he could already see the distinctive green and white awnings of Pinnacle Department Store, not knowing that inside those walls his daughter sat terrified, being treated like a criminal for a crime she didn't commit. The helicopter began its descent, drawing attention from pedestrians below. As it touched down on the helipad just 2 blocks from the store, Marcus was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his every movement charged with purpose. He stepped onto the concrete, straightened his tie, and began walking toward Pinnacle, each step bringing him closer to a confrontation that would change many lives forever. Marcus Taylor entered Pinnacle Department Store with the controlled power of a gathering storm. The automatic doors seemed to part with extra deference as his 6'2" frame crossed the threshold, designer shoes silent against the polished marble floor. Despite his fury, there was nothing uncontrolled about his movements. Years of navigating hostile boardrooms had taught him that true power lay in restraint, in the potential energy of what could be unleashed rather than in chaotic displays. Still, customers and employees alike seemed to sense the dangerous energy emanating from him, creating a subtle wake of hushed whispers and sidelong glances as he moved purposefully through the store. "Excuse me," a young sales associate stammered as Marcus approached the information desk. "Can I help you find something?" Her eyes widened with recognition as she got a clearer look at his face. Marcus Taylor was a familiar figure in Atlanta business circles, his image regularly appearing in financial magazines and local news. The store's carefully cultivated atmosphere of exclusivity suddenly seemed flimsy in the presence of genuine power. "The security office," Marcus stated, rather than asked, his deep voice betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. "Where is it?" The associate pointed a trembling finger toward a hallway at the back of the store. "Through there, past the home goods department on the left. But, sir, that area is for authorized personnel only." Marcus was already moving. "I'm about to be very authorized." As he strode through the store, more employees and customers began to notice him. A few pulled out phones, sensing that something significant was happening. Marcus Taylor didn't shop at Pinnacle Department Store. Marcus Taylor sent assistants to shop for him, or more likely ordered custom-made items from exclusive designers. His presence here, radiating barely contained fury, was like seeing a lion walking through a shopping mall. Fascinating, terrifying, and definitely worth documenting. As he approached the security hallway, a uniformed guard stationed at a desk looked up with the practiced wariness of someone whose job involved regular confrontation. "Sir, this area is restricted. I'll need to see ID if you're here to pick someone up." Marcus stopped directly in front of the desk, close enough that the guard had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. "My name is Marcus Taylor." My 7-year-old daughter Zara is being detained in your security office under a false accusation of theft. You have exactly 3 seconds to direct me to her, or I will find her myself." The guard swallowed, hard recognition dawning. "Mr. Taylor, I understand your concern, but there are protocols." Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "Your protocols stopped applying the moment someone put their hands on my daughter. 1. The guard's eyes darted to a phone on his desk. "Sir, let me call my supervisor, 2. Through the glass partition behind the guard, Marcus could now see into the security office. His heart clenched painfully at the sight of Zara. Her small frame dwarfed by an adult chair, tears streaming down her face as a blonde woman loomed over her, speaking with sharp accusatory gestures. A security camera in the corner recorded the scene. 3. Marcus stepped around the desk, ignoring the guard's protests as he pushed open the door to the security office. The blonde woman looked up, irritation flashing across her face at the interruption. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave immediately." Before Marcus could respond, Vanessa burst through a side door, her face lighting up with relief at the sight of her brother-in-law. "Marcus, thank God you're here. They wouldn't let me in with her. They've had her alone in there for over an hour." Zara's tear-stained face turned toward the sound of her father's voice. "Daddy," she cried. Attempting to run to him, but the security guard in the room, Jack Wilson, gently but firmly kept her seated with a hand on her shoulder. It took every ounce of Marcus's self-control not to physically remove that hand. Instead, he focused on the store manager whose name badge identified her as Diane Reynolds. "Take your employee's hand off my daughter, now." There was something in Marcus's voice that made Jack immediately withdraw his hand, stepping back with a nervous glance at Diane. Diane, however, seemed determined to maintain her authority. "Mr. Taylor, I presume your daughter was caught stealing a $200 crystal hairpin from our display case. We're following standard loss prevention protocol while waiting for the police to arrive." Marcus's voice remained dangerously soft. "My daughter is 7 years old. She has been detained for over an hour without parental consent or adult representation. You have violated not only store policy, but several laws regarding the treatment of minors. I suggest you consider your next words very carefully, Miss Reynolds." Diane's chin lifted defiantly. "We take shoplifting very seriously at Pinnacle, regardless of the perpetrator's age or their parents' status. These people need to learn that actions have consequences." The quiet that followed her statement was absolute. Even the humming of the fluorescent lights seemed to dim in acknowledgement of the line that had just been crossed. "These people," Marcus repeated, each syllable precisely enunciated. Belatedly, Diane seemed to realize her mistake, but pride prevented her from backing down. "Shoplifters," she amended, though the damage was already done. "I meant shoplifters." The tension in the room was interrupted by the arrival of 2 police officers responding to Diane's earlier call. The first, a middle-aged white officer with a receding hairline, surveyed the scene with professional detachment. The second, a younger Latino officer named James Rivera, immediately recognized Marcus and straightened his posture. "Mr. Taylor, is everything all right, sir?" Marcus turned to face the officers, his expression grim but composed. "No, Officer Rivera, everything is not all right. My 7-year-old daughter has been falsely accused of theft, detained without adult representation, and subjected to racial profiling by the management of this establishment." Officer Rivera's eyebrows rose as he processed this information. Diane quickly interjected. "That's not true. We have reason to believe she stole a valuable item from our display, and we were simply following protocol. What do you think about this situation? Would you have remained calm like Marcus, or would you have lost your temper?" Comment number 1. If you believe staying calm in the face of injustice shows true strength, or comment number 2, if you think righteous anger is sometimes necessary when defending your child. And if you're wondering whether security camera footage will reveal the truth about what really happened in that store, like this video and subscribe to find out. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. How would you feel if your child was accused of a crime they didn't commit? And what lengths would you go to protect them? Let's continue with this shocking story. Officer Rivera's recognition of Marcus Taylor changed the atmosphere in the security office immediately. The younger officer stepped forward, extending his hand respectfully. "Mr. Taylor, I was a recipient of your community scholarship program 10 years ago. It helped me afford the police academy. I never expected to meet you like this." Marcus shook the officer's hand firmly, but briefly his focus unwavering. "I appreciate your service, Officer Rivera, but right now I'm here as a father, not a philanthropist. My daughter has been wrongfully detained, and I need this situation resolved." The other officer, whose nameplate read Officer Brennan, looked between them with newfound uncertainty. The casual confidence with which he had entered the room was rapidly dissolving as he realized this was not a routine shoplifting case. "Perhaps we should review what happened," Officer Brennan suggested, turning to Diane. "You reported a theft of a crystal hairpin valued at $200. Diane nodded emphatically, shooting a distrustful glance at Zara, who had finally managed to move to her father's side, clinging to his leg as if afraid she would be separated from him again. "I personally witnessed this child lingering by the display case. The item was there before she approached and missing after she left. We have the right to detain suspected shoplifters while waiting for police." Marcus placed a protective hand on Zara's shoulder. "Do you have evidence of my daughter actually taking this item, security footage, perhaps?" Diane hesitated, her confidence faltering slightly. "Our security cameras cover the general area, but not directly over that particular display case." Marcus's expression hardened. "So you've detained and traumatized a 7-year-old child for over an hour, based on nothing but your suspicion. No evidence, no witnesses, just your certainty that a little black girl must be stealing if she looks at something." Expensive Officer Rivera cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you have the security footage available? We should review it before proceeding." Jack Wilson, the security guard who had been mostly silent until now, moved to a computer terminal in the corner of the room. "I can pull it up now," he offered, looking relieved to have something concrete to do. As Jack brought up the footage, a small crowd began gathering outside the security office. Through the glass partition, Marcus could see store employees whispering among themselves, several customers with phones raised, and a nervous-looking man in a suit hurrying toward them. The man burst into the already crowded office, slightly out of breath. "I'm Thomas Brooks, the store manager's supervisor. What seems to be the problem here?" Before Diane could answer, Marcus turned to face him. "The problem, Mr. Brooks, is that your employee has falsely accused my daughter of theft, detained her without adult representation, caused her significant emotional distress, and made racially charged comments in the process." "I'd say that's quite a substantial problem, wouldn't you?" Thomas blanched his eyes, darting between Marcus, the police officers, and Diane. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Diane is one of our most experienced managers with an excellent record in loss prevention." A new voice joined the conversation as Maria Gonzalez stepped into the doorway. "That's not true," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "Diane targets black customers all the time. Everyone knows it. We've all seen it." Diane whirled to face her. "That's a lie. How dare you?" Thomas looked stricken. "Maria, this is not the appropriate time or place." "When is the appropriate time?" Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "When another child is traumatized. When someone is injured because your employee escalates a situation based on her prejudices. When your store faces a major lawsuit and public relations disaster. Because I assure you, Mr. Brooks, all of those things are currently on the table." Jack Wilson called out from the computer. "I have the footage from the last 2 hours. Do you want me to play it?" All eyes turned to the screen as Jack played the security video. The footage clearly showed Zara admiring the butterfly hairpin in the display case, looking at it longingly, and then walking away with empty hands. No sleight of hand, no suspicious movements, nothing that could possibly be interpreted as theft. What's more, the footage continued after Zara left, showing several other customers approaching the same display case, including a teenage girl who spent several minutes there before moving on. Diane's face had gone pale as the video continued playing. Officer Brennan turned to her with a disapproving frown. "Ma'am, that footage doesn't show any evidence of theft." Did you check the display case to confirm the item was actually missing before detaining this child? Diane's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Thomas Brooks stepped in quickly. Officer, I'm sure Diane was just being cautious. Pinnacle has a significant problem with theft, and our managers are trained to be vigilant. Marcus's patience had reached its limit. Your manager wasn't being vigilant. She was being racist. And now she's been caught on camera harassing an innocent child because of the color of her skin. Thomas's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Taylor, that's a very serious accusation. Pinnacle Department Store does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Neither do I, Marcus replied coldly. Which is why I find it particularly troubling that Genesis Technologies, where I serve as CEO, is not only one of your biggest corporate clients, but also owns 40% of the shares in Pinnacle's parent company, Lux Retail Group. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Thomas's face drained of all color as he processed the implications. Diane looked as though she might faint. Even the police officers seemed stunned by this development. The store's landline phone began ringing insistently, breaking the silence. Jack answered it hesitantly. Security office. Yes, sir. Yes, he's here right now. I understand. Right away. He hung up and turned to Thomas. That was Richard Keller, the district manager. He says he just received multiple calls from Genesis Technologies' legal department and wants updates every 5 minutes on this situation. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as a small black girl being intimidated by store authority had transformed into a retail middle manager, facing the wrath of someone who effectively owned a significant portion of the company she worked for. Diane's demeanor changed dramatically, her previous confidence replaced by visible fear. Mr. Taylor. She began, her voice trembling slightly. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If your daughter says she didn't take the hairpin, then I'm sure she didn't. Perhaps another customer moved it or purchased it without proper processing. We can certainly let this go with our sincere apologies. Marcus fixed her with a stare that made her physically step back. Let this go. My daughter was followed around your store because of her race. She was accused of theft without evidence. She was separated from her guardian, detained in this room, reduced to tears, and made to feel like a criminal. And you want to let this go, now that you realize who I am. Zara remained pressed against her father's side, still trembling slightly despite the dramatic reversal of fortune. The trauma of the experience hadn't disappeared just because the accusations had been proven false. Marcus knelt down to her level, his voice softening as he addressed his daughter. Are you okay, Butterfly? He asked, using his special nickname for her. Zara shook her head, tears welling up again. They thought I was bad, Daddy. I didn't take anything. I promise. Marcus gathered her into a gentle hug. I know, baby. I know. You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing. He stood again, lifting Zara into his arms where she buried her face against his shoulder. Turning back to the room, his expression made it clear that this situation was far from resolved. Officer Rivera, Officer Brennan, I'd like to file a formal complaint against this store and specifically against Miss Knight. Reynolds for false imprisonment, harassment, and racial discrimination. Officer Rivera nodded already, pulling out his notepad. We'll take your statement, Mr. Taylor. And there may be additional charges to consider, given that this involved a minor. Thomas Brooks looked panicked. Mr. Taylor, surely we can resolve this without formal charges. Pinnacle values your business, and we're deeply sorry for this unfortunate incident. Perhaps we could offer store credit, or Marcus cut him off with a single raised hand. Mr. Brooks, do you really think store credit is an appropriate response to what happened here today? The store supervisor wilted under Marcus's gaze, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation his employee had created. Outside the security office, the situation was rapidly evolving from a private dispute into a public spectacle. Customers with smartphones had been recording snippets of the confrontation through the glass partition, and within minutes, video clips began circulating on social media. The hashtag number Pinnacle Discrimination started trending locally, as more people shared their own experiences of being profiled while shopping. Marcus could see the gathering crowd and noticed the distinctive white vans of local news stations beginning to arrive in the parking lot. Dominic Porter, Marcus's executive assistant, appeared at the doorway, somehow having made his way through the store's back entrance. "Sir, there are reporters outside. Zara Chen just arrived with the legal team, and she's keeping them at bay for now, but they're asking for statements." Marcus nodded, still holding Zara protectively. "Create a path for us to exit without Zara being exposed to cameras, and find out if William Marshall has arrived yet." As Dominic disappeared to execute these instructions, the store's phone rang again. Jack answered it, his expression growing increasingly anxious as he listened. "Yes, sir, he's still here. Yes, sir, right away." He hung up and turned to Thomas. "Mr. Brooks," that was Robert Anderson. The name caused Thomas to physically flinch. Robert Anderson was the owner of Pinnacle Department Store, a man known for his hands-off approach to management until problems became significant enough to threaten profits. "He's on his way here now. He said to tell you that Genesis Technologies has canceled its corporate account effective immediately, and their legal team is reviewing all contracts with Lux Retail Group." The news hit Thomas like a physical blow. Genesis Technologies' corporate account represented millions in annual revenue, with executives regularly purchasing gifts, electronics, and luxury items for clients and employees through Pinnacle's personal shopping service. Thomas turned to Marcus, desperation evident in his voice. "Mr. Taylor, please. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. We can make this right." Marcus's response was measured but unyielding. "A misunderstanding is when someone mishears a coffee order or shows up on the wrong day for an appointment. What happened to my daughter was systematic racial profiling, followed by intimidation and emotional abuse. There is no making that right with an apology and a discount." Thomas attempted a different approach. "We value diversity at Pinnacle. Many of our employees are people of color. This isolated incident doesn't reflect our company values." From the doorway, Maria Gonzalez scoffed audibly. "That's not true. Ask any black employee here. Ask the security team how often they're told to follow black customers compared to white ones. This isn't isolated at all." Diane shot her a venomous look. "You're going to regret this, Maria. You have no idea what you're talking about." Officer Rivera, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up sharply. "Miss Reynolds, that sounded very much like a threat against a witness. I'd advise you to watch your words carefully." While this exchange was taking place, Vanessa had moved closer to Marcus and Zara, her hand protectively on her niece's back. "I called Regina," she whispered to Marcus, referring to Zara's therapist. "She can see Zara this afternoon. She said this kind of trauma needs immediate attention." Marcus nodded gratefully. Despite his focus on holding Pinnacle accountable, his primary concern was his daughter's well-being. The psychological impact of being accused, detained, and treated like a criminal could leave lasting scars, especially on a child as sensitive and perceptive as Zara. The situation was interrupted by the arrival of Zara Chen, Genesis Technologies' chief legal counsel, a sharply dressed woman in her 40s, who entered the room with purposeful strides. "Mr. Taylor, I've reviewed the initial facts of the case. We have grounds for multiple civil actions, including false imprisonment, negligent infliction of emotional distress, violation of civil rights, and potentially several others, depending on what the full investigation reveals." Thomas Brooks looked increasingly desperate. "Miss Chen, I'm sure we can resolve this without legal action. Pinnacle is prepared to offer." Sarah cut him off with a raised hand. "Mr. Brooks, I advise you not to make any offers or admissions without your own legal counsel present. This has moved well beyond the realm of customer service recovery." Outside the store, the crowd of onlookers and media had grown significantly. Through the front windows, Marcus could see camera crews setting up, reporters doing stand-ups, and a growing number of protesters holding hastily made signs with messages like "Shop while black is not a crime" and Pinnacle profiles. The store's phone rang yet again. This time, Thomas lunged for it before Jack could answer. "This is Thomas Brooks." "Yes, sir. I understand the severity. We're handling it as best we can." His face grew increasingly pale as he listened to whatever was being said on the other end. When he hung up, he looked shell-shocked. "The board is convening an emergency meeting. Our stock has dropped 8% in the last 30 minutes as news of this spreads." During this commotion, Diane had been trying to edge toward the door, apparently hoping to slip away unnoticed. Officer Brennan stepped smoothly into her path. "Miss Reynolds, we're going to need you to remain here while we complete our investigation." Diane's previous arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by barely concealed panic. "This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. You can't possibly be taking their side over a legitimate business concern." Marcus turned to her, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Miss Reynolds, let me be perfectly clear. By this time tomorrow, you will no longer work for Pinnacle or any other retail establishment in this city. By the end of the week, your name and actions will be known to every corporate HR department in the state. What you did today wasn't doing your job. It was acting on your prejudices and causing harm to an innocent child." Vanessa, who had been relatively quiet throughout the confrontation, spoke up. "While we've been dealing with this, I've been on my phone. There are at least 7 other families on social media right now sharing stories about being profiled in this store, specifically mentioning a blonde manager. This has been going on for years." Thomas looked stricken. "That can't be right. We would have had complaints filed." "Not everyone has the resources or knowledge to file formal complaints," Marcus pointed out. "And those who do are often dismissed or placated with small gestures, just as you tried to do with us. But social media has changed the equation. People can share their experiences and find patterns that might otherwise remain hidden." Robert Anderson, the store owner, finally arrived, bursting into the already crowded office with the frantic energy of someone whose financial empire was beginning to crumble before his eyes. "Mr. Taylor, Robert Anderson, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. I've already instructed our accounting department to issue a full refund for any purchases your family has ever made at our establishments." The absurdity of the offer, a refund for non-existent thefts, might have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, it only underscored the store's panic and desperation. Marcus regarded him coolly. "Mr. Anderson, I'm not interested in refunds. I'm interested in accountability and systemic change. Your store manager racially profiled and traumatized my daughter. That's not something you can simply write a check to fix." Robert wiped sweat from his brow. Of course. Diane will be terminated immediately. You have my word." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged, "but it's far from sufficient. The problem isn't just one prejudiced manager. It's a culture that enables and rewards that prejudice." How many employees raised concerns about Diane's behavior before today? How many complaints were dismissed? How many families left your store feeling humiliated and powerless? Robert had no answer, his mouth opening and closing. Silently. As the adults continued their tense discussion, Zara remained huddled against her father, emotionally exhausted from the ordeal. The 7-year-old who had entered the store that morning, excited about finding a special dress for her recital, had been replaced by a subdued, frightened child who now understood that the world would sometimes see her as suspicious simply because of her skin color. It was a lesson no parent wants their child to learn, especially not in such a traumatic way. Outside, the storm was gathering strength. News vans from every major network in Atlanta had arrived. Reporters were interviewing protesters and former customers, and social media was ablaze with accounts of similar experiences. What had begun as one child's terrifying encounter with prejudice was rapidly evolving into a reckoning that would force not just Pinnacle, but retailers across the city to confront the ugly reality of racial profiling in their parent establishments. The situation at Pinnacle Department Store continued to escalate as Sarah Chen, Marcus's legal counsel, returned to the security office after making several urgent phone calls. Her normally composed expression had been replaced by one of grim satisfaction. "Mr. Taylor, I've had our team run a preliminary background check on Miss Reynolds. This isn't her first position in retail management." Sarah opened a folder she was carrying and laid several documents on the desk. She was previously employed at Grayson's department store and before that at Meridian Luxury Retail. At both establishments, there were multiple complaints filed about racial profiling and discriminatory treatment of customers of color. Neither case resulted in termination, but she was transferred to different locations both times. Thomas Brooks paled visibly. That information wasn't in her employment records when we hired her. Sarah's smile was cold. That's because both previous employers signed non-disclosure agreements as part of settlements with customers who filed complaints. They agreed not to disclose the issues in future reference checks in exchange for the customer's silence. Our legal team has certain resources that allowed us to uncover this pattern. The revelation landed like a bomb in the already tense room. Diane had moved to a corner, seemingly trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible, but now all eyes turned to her. "That's not true," she protested weakly. "Those were misunderstandings just like this one." Officer Rivera had been quietly typing on a tablet and now looked up. "I've just accessed the police database. There have been 17 calls to this store in the past year for suspected shoplifting. 14 of those suspects were people of color, and 9 were ultimately released without charges due to lack of evidence. That's a statistically significant pattern." Marcus's expression darkened further. "So not only did you hire someone with a history of racial profiling, but you created an environment where that behavior could continue and even thrive. The question is whether this was negligence or deliberate policy." Thomas began to stammer a denial but was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. William Marshall, Chief of Police and Marcus's longtime friend, entered the security office with the authoritative presence that had helped him rise through the ranks. At 50, William carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced countless difficult situations and navigated them successfully. "Marcus," he said with a nod of acknowledgement before turning to survey the room. "Officers Rivera and Brennan, thank you for your response. I'll be taking over from here." William's arrival represented another significant shift in the power dynamics. As Chief of Police, his presence elevated the incident from a routine call to something requiring the highest level of departmental attention. Chief Marshal Thomas began nervously. "We're handling this situation internally." William cut him off with a raised hand. "Mr. Brooks, when a minor is unlawfully detained and racially profiled, it ceases to be an internal matter. This is now an active police investigation, and I'll be personally overseeing it." At that moment, a former Pinnacle employee named Rachel Winters approached the now crowded doorway of the security office. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice slightly trembling but determined. "I quit working here 3 months ago because I couldn't stand what was happening. I have documentation." She held up her phone. Emails between Diane and Thomas discussing what they called high-risk customer profiles that were really just racial targeting guidelines. Thomas knew exactly what was happening. The accusation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Thomas's face contorted in panic. "That's a complete fabrication. She's a disgruntled former employee." Rachel stepped forward, her resolve strengthening. "I sent the emails to myself before I left. I knew someday they'd be needed. I just couldn't prove it was wrong by myself." As Rachel handed her phone to Chief Marshal, Robert Anderson stepped forward, desperation evident in every movement. "Mr. Taylor, please, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies everyone. What if we established a scholarship in your daughter's name? A diversity initiative? Anything you want." Marcus regarded him coldly. "Mr. Anderson, you still don't understand. This isn't about what I want. It's about justice for my daughter, and for every other person who has been humiliated in your store because of the color of their skin. It's about accountability and genuine change, not PR gestures." Sarah Chen, who had been examining the emails on Rachel's phone, looked up with a grim expression. "Mr. Taylor, these communications clearly establish knowledge at the supervisory level. They refer specifically to maintaining vigilance with demographically high-risk shoppers and include instructions to security personnel about which customers to monitor more closely." Chief Marshal nodded already, typing a message on his phone. "I'm requesting a warrant to seize all electronic communications from Pinnacle's management team." This evidence suggests a systematic policy of racial discrimination that may violate multiple civil rights statutes. As the legal and law enforcement aspects of the situation continued to unfold, Marcus noticed that Zara was showing increasing signs of distress. Her small body trembled against him, and she had withdrawn into herself, barely responding when spoken to. Marcus recognized the symptoms of psychological trauma, having experienced similar reactions himself in his youth, after incidents of racial discrimination. Dr. Eliza Washington, a child psychologist and family friend whom Vanessa had called earlier, arrived and immediately assessed Zara's condition. "She's experiencing acute stress reaction, doctor," Washington explained quietly to Marcus. "She needs to be removed from this environment as soon as possible and given a safe, quiet space to process what's happened." Marcus nodded, his priorities instantly clear. Despite the satisfying justice being served to Pinnacle and its management, his daughter's well-being came first. "We need to get her out of here," he told Dominic, who had been standing by throughout the confrontation. "Arrange for the helicopter to take us directly home." As preparations were being made for their departure, the situation outside the store continued to escalate. The crowd of protesters had grown many holding signs with messages like "Shop while Black" and "Retail racism is real." Local community leaders had arrived to support the impromptu demonstration, and the media coverage had expanded to include national news networks. Inside the security office, the evidence against Pinnacle and its management continued to mount. Jack Wilson, the security guard who had initially seemed uncomfortable with Zara's detention, finally spoke up. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice low but clear. "The security footage from previous incidents involving black customers is routinely deleted after 72 hours, even though our normal retention policy is 30 days. This revelation drew sharp intakes of breath from multiple people in the room. Chief Marshal's expression darkened further. That would constitute destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice if these incidents resulted in legal complaints. Robert Anderson looked like a man watching his life's work crumble before his eyes. "I wasn't aware of any of this," he insisted, though his credibility was rapidly diminishing with each new revelation. "This was all happening without my knowledge." Marcus fixed him with a penetrating stare. "Mr. Miters." "Anderson, either you knew about these policies and tacitly approved them, or you were so disconnected from the actual operations of your business that systematic discrimination could flourish unchecked. Neither possibility speaks well of your leadership." As Marcus prepared to leave with Zara, he turned to Sarah Chen. "I want a comprehensive lawsuit filed against Pinnacle, its parent company, and every executive who participated in or enabled these discriminatory practices. This isn't just about today. It's about changing how retail establishments treat people of color going forward." Sarah nodded her understanding. "We'll pursue this to the fullest extent of the law. And with the evidence that's emerging, we have an extremely strong case." The gathered crowd parted as Marcus carried Zara toward the exit, Vanessa and Dr. Washington following closely behind. The sight of the powerful CEO cradling his traumatized daughter created an image that would later appear on front pages across the country, a visceral reminder that wealth and success provided no shield against the pain of racial discrimination. What do you think is the most shocking part of this story so far? The store manager's blatant racism, the revelation of systematic discrimination, or the fact that previous complaints were covered up? Comment number 1 if you think racial profiling in retail needs more public exposure. Number 2, if you believe stricter laws and penalties are needed. Or number 3, if you think education and training are the answer. If you're wondering whether justice will truly be served in this case, like this video, and subscribe to find out what happens next. How would you feel if your child experienced something similar? Would you fight for systemic change like Marcus? Or would you settle for a private resolution? The shocking conclusion to this story might change how you see retail spaces forever. By evening, the story of Zara Taylor's traumatic experience at Pinnacle Department Store had exploded across traditional and social media platforms. Local news channels led their broadcasts with dramatic footage of Marcus Taylor carrying his daughter from the store, followed by interviews with protesters and community members sharing their own experiences of retail discrimination. The hashtag number Pinnacle discrimination had evolved into the broader number shopping while black, becoming a nationwide trending topic as thousands of people shared similar stories of being followed, questioned, and humiliated while simply trying to shop. National news networks picked up the story, framing it as part of the larger conversation about racial bias in America. 7-year-old Zara Taylor went shopping for a recital dress and instead received a traumatic lesson in racial profiling, one anchor began solemnly. But her father, tech CEO Marcus Taylor, is turning personal pain into a movement for accountability and change. Marcus had taken Zara home, creating a protective bubble around her with the help of Dr. Washington and family members. The child was showing signs of severe anxiety, including nightmares and a newfound fear of public spaces. She keeps asking what she did wrong, Marcus explained to Dr. Washington during a quiet moment. No matter how many times I tell her she did nothing wrong, she doesn't fully believe it. That's the most painful part, watching her question herself because of someone else's prejudice. Meanwhile, the consequences for Pinnacle Department Store were swift and severe. By the following morning, their stock had plummeted 15%, wiping out hundreds of millions in market value overnight. Robert Anderson called an emergency press conference, hoping to contain the damage. Standing behind a podium emblazoned with the Pinnacle logo, he read a carefully prepared statement. Pinnacle Department Store categorically condemns racial discrimination in all forms. The incident involving Zara Taylor does not reflect our values or policies. We have terminated the employment of the manager involved and are cooperating fully with authorities to investigate this isolated incident. The statement might have been sufficient in an earlier era before cell phone videos and social media could rapidly expose the hollowness of corporate platitudes. Within minutes, viewers were tearing apart Anderson's claims online, pointing out the growing evidence that Zara's experience was far from isolated. Marcus watched the press conference from his home office, his expression hardening as Anderson attempted to minimize the systemic nature of the problem. When his phone rang with a request from CNN for a response, Marcus agreed to a live interview. Seated in his home library, the backdrop of books lending gravitas, to his words Marcus spoke with the measured precision that had made him successful in business. What happened to my daughter wasn't an isolated incident or the actions of one prejudiced employee, he explained to the millions watching. It was the predictable outcome of a culture that views black customers with automatic suspicion. The emails and documentation we've uncovered show a pattern of targeting that was known and tacitly approved at the highest levels of Pinnacle's management. The interviewer, a veteran journalist known for asking tough questions, leaned forward. Mr. Taylor, Pinnacle has offered to establish a diversity initiative in your daughter's name and make a substantial donation to civil rights organizations. Why have you refused? These offers, Marcus's response, was immediate and firm. Because writing a check is easy. Real change is hard. I'm not interested in helping Pinnacle with a PR exercise that allows them to avoid addressing the underlying issues. True accountability means acknowledging the full scope of the problem, making structural changes to prevent recurrence, and providing genuine redress to all those who have been harmed by these practices, not just those with powerful parents who can force the issue. As Marcus's interview was airing, Diane Reynolds made the catastrophic decision to speak to a local news station without legal representation. Seemingly unable to accept her role in the growing scandal, she portrayed herself as the victim of unfair targeting. I was just following standard loss prevention protocols, she insisted, her voice defensive. This has nothing to do with race. I would have done exactly the same thing if it had been a white child. When the interviewer pressed her about the disproportionate number of black customers she had reported for suspected shoplifting, Diane's composure cracked. Look, the statistics don't lie. Certain demographics are higher risk for retail theft. That's just reality. The interview was cut short by the station, but the damage was done. Diane's thinly veiled racist comments provided further confirmation of the discriminatory attitudes that had been allowed to flourish at Pinnacle. By the following day, Diane found herself not only unemployed, but essentially unemployable as her name and face became synonymous with retail racism in America. The fallout continued to spread beyond Pinnacle. Other major retailers, sensing the shifting public sentiment and fearing similar exposures, began announcing reviews of their own security policies and practices. Corporate statements emphasizing commitments to diversity and inclusion flooded business news outlets, though consumers remained skeptical about whether these represented genuine change or merely defensive posturing. Marcus, meanwhile, was taking concrete action. He announced the formation of a task force composed of civil rights attorneys, retail security experts, and community advocates to develop new industry standards for non-discriminatory loss prevention practices. This isn't about punishing one store or one manager, he explained during a press conference held at Genesis Technologies headquarters. It's about transforming an industry that has for too long operated on assumptions and biases rather than evidence and equity. The lawsuit against Pinnacle, formally filed by Zara Taylor and her team, was comprehensive in its scope. It alleged not only the specific harms done to Zara, but also a pattern and practice of discrimination affecting countless other customers. The legal filing included statements from former employees, statistical analyses of security interventions by race, and the damning emails uncovered by Rachel Winters. "We're seeking both compensatory and punitive damages," Zara explained to reporters. "But more importantly, we're asking the court to mandate structural changes in how Pinnacle operates, including independent oversight of security practices, comprehensive anti-bias training, and transparent reporting of customer interactions by demographic categories." As public pressure mounted, Robert Anderson made increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his company's reputation and stock price. He reached out to Marcus repeatedly, each offer more generous than the last: a multi-million-dollar settlement, a seat on Pinnacle's board, naming rights for a new children's department. Each time, Marcus declined. "This isn't a negotiation," he told Anderson during their final conversation. "It's a reckoning." The culmination of the public phase came when Marcus was invited to address Pinnacle's board of directors, a group of predominantly white executives who had governed the company for decades with little attention to issues of racial equity. Standing before them in the company's luxurious boardroom, Marcus spoke not as a grieving father or an angry customer, but as a business leader addressing peers who had failed in their fundamental responsibilities. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice resonant in the hushed room, "you've presided over a company culture that has systematically discriminated against people who look like my daughter. You've incentivized managers to target black customers under the guise of loss prevention. You've dismissed or settled complaints quietly, rather than addressing the root causes." Marcus paused, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "Now you're facing not just a lawsuit, but an existential crisis of public trust. Your customers are leaving, your investors are selling, your employees are speaking out, and your defense that you didn't know what was happening in your own stores is perhaps the most damning indictment of all." The silence that followed was profound. These were individuals accustomed to power and deference, now confronted with their own complicity in a system that had caused real harm to real people. "I'm not here to lecture you on morality," Marcus continued. "I'm here to tell you that discrimination isn't just wrong, it's bad business. And the cost of continuing these practices has just become prohibitively high." As Marcus concluded his address, the board members exchanged glances, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. The company they had built and profited from for years was now at a crossroads, its future dependent on their willingness to acknowledge past failures and commit to genuine transformation. Outside the boardroom, the movement sparked by one little girl's traumatic experience continued to grow, challenging not just Pinnacle, but an entire industry to confront its biases and reform its practices. The reckoning had only just begun. The formal announcement came through a terse press release issued by Pinnacle Department Store's Corporate Communications Office. Effective immediately, Diane Reynolds has been terminated from her position as store manager. Additionally, Thomas Brooks has been placed on administrative leave, pending a comprehensive investigation into store security practices and policies. The statement, clearly crafted by crisis management professionals, went on to express deep regret for the experience of the Taylor family and a commitment to reviewing and revising all loss prevention protocols to ensure equitable treatment of all customers. What the press release didn't mention was the behind-the-scenes chaos engulfing Pinnacle's corporate headquarters. Robert Anderson had been summoned to an emergency meeting with the board of directors, where he faced pointed questions about his leadership and oversight. The lawsuit filed by Marcus Taylor's legal team had sent shockwaves through the corporate structure, with initial estimates suggesting potential damages in the tens of millions of dollars. More concerning for the long-term viability of the business was the steady exodus of customers and corporate partners. Major fashion brands were quietly inquiring about terminating their vendor relationships with Pinnacle, unwilling to have their products associated with a store becoming synonymous with racial discrimination. Genesis Technologies, under Marcus's direction, had not only canceled its substantial corporate account, but had begun reviewing all business relationships with companies connected to Pinnacle's parent corporation, Lux Retail Group. The ripple effects were spreading rapidly throughout the business community. In a desperate bid to salvage the situation, Robert Anderson reached out to Marcus once more, this time with a different approach. "Mr. A.D. Taylor," he began during their phone call, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "I'm not calling with another settlement offer. I'm calling to ask for your help." The request caught Marcus by surprise. "My help?" "Yes. I've been authorized by the board to establish a comprehensive task force to reform our security and customer service policies. We need someone with your expertise in organizational transformation to guide this process. Someone the public trusts. Someone who understands what's truly at stake." Marcus's laugh held no humor. "Mr. Anderson, you're asking the father of a child, your store traumatized, to help you rebuild your public image." "No," Anderson replied, with what seemed like genuine understanding for the first time. "I'm asking a business leader with a proven track record of ethical leadership to help us become the company we should have been all along. Not for our sake, but for the sake of every customer who walks through our doors in the future." The proposition was unexpected, and Marcus found himself considering it not as a victory for himself, but as an opportunity for meaningful change. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "But understand this. If I agree, it won't be a cosmetic exercise. It would mean full transparency, independent oversight, and structural changes from top to bottom." Anderson's relief was audible. "That's exactly what we need, whether we all realize it yet or not." While these corporate machinations were unfolding, Zara was slowly beginning her own journey of recovery. The exuberant, confident child who had entered Pinnacle that fateful day had been replaced by a quieter, more cautious version of herself. She startled at sudden movements, clung to her father in public spaces, and had nightmares about being taken away from her family. Dr. Washington had begun specialized trauma therapy with Zara, using play and art to help her process her experience. "She's drawing a lot of cages and locks," Dr. Washington explained to Marcus during one session debrief. "That's her brain trying to make sense of the feeling of being trapped and powerless. But she's also drawing butterflies breaking free, which is a positive sign. She's creating a narrative of escape and liberation." The symbolism wasn't lost on Marcus. The butterfly hairpin that had inadvertently triggered the entire ordeal had now become a symbol of resilience and transformation in his daughter's healing process. Inspired by this, Marcus worked with designers at Genesis Technologies to create a small digital butterfly pin that could be worn on clothing or accessories. The pin, equipped with a discrete camera and audio recording capability, was designed to activate when its wearer felt threatened or discriminated against, providing evidence that could later be used to address misconduct. The Butterfly Protocol, as the initiative came to be called, would provide Genesis Technologies devices and legal support to individuals who experience discrimination in retail settings, creating an accountability mechanism where traditional complaint processes had failed. On the legal front, Sarah Chen was methodically building a case that went far beyond Zara's individual experience. The discovery process had revealed a trove of internal communications, demonstrating that Pinnacle's leadership had been aware of racial disparities in security interventions for years, but had chosen to ignore or minimize them. Perhaps most damning were the performance metrics used for loss prevention staff, which effectively rewarded them for stopping and searching customers with no penalty for false accusations. They created a system that incentivized racial profiling, Sarah explained during a strategy session with Marcus. Security personnel were promoted based on how many preventions they recorded, regardless of whether those stops were justified or how many innocent customers were traumatized in the process. As the lawsuit progressed, other retailers began proactively examining their own practices, fearful of becoming the next Pinnacle. Major chains announced new training programs, revised security protocols, and independent audits of their loss prevention statistics. Industry associations convened special sessions on non-discriminatory retail security, inviting civil rights experts to provide guidance. The transformation wasn't limited to corporate policy. State legislators began introducing bills specifically addressing retail discrimination, with penalties for stores found to engage in patterns of biased security practices. Community organizations developed Know Your Rights campaigns for shoppers, educating them about what constituted illegal detention and how to document discriminatory treatment. 6 weeks after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected call from Chief William Marshall. "We've completed our investigation," William told him. "The district attorney has decided to file criminal charges against Diane Reynolds for false imprisonment of a minor. Given Zara's age and the evidence of discriminatory intent, they're treating this as a serious offense." The news brought Marcus a complex mix of emotions. While part of him felt vindication in seeing real consequences for the woman who had traumatized his daughter, another part recognized that Diane Reynolds was herself a product of a larger system that had encouraged and rewarded her biases. "What about Thomas Brooks and the others who created the policies she was following?" Marcus asked. "The investigation is ongoing," William replied. "Corporate culpability is harder to establish in criminal court, but the evidence we've gathered will certainly strengthen your civil case." As the legal processes moved forward, Marcus focused increasingly on the broader implications of what had happened to Zara. In a widely shared opinion piece published in a major newspaper, he wrote, "My daughter entered a store as a child, excited about a piano recital, and left as a victim of racial profiling." The distance between those two states, between innocence and trauma, between belonging and exclusion, was crossed in minutes, but the journey back will take much longer. As a society, we must ask ourselves why we continue to tolerate systems that transform shopping while Black from an ordinary activity into a potentially traumatic experience. And we must commit ourselves to creating commercial spaces where all customers are presumed innocent, worthy of respect and welcome. The piece resonated deeply, particularly with parents of color who had experienced the painful necessity of preparing their children for the discrimination they would inevitably face. Thousands shared their own stories in response, creating a powerful testament to the pervasiveness of the problem and the urgent need for change. As the movement continued to gain momentum, Marcus received word that several executives at Pinnacle's parent company had resigned, unable to weather the scandal or unwilling to participate in the painful process of institutional transformation. New leadership was being recruited with explicit mandates to reform the company's approach to diversity and security. The reckoning that had begun with one child's tears was now reshaping an entire industry's understanding of its responsibilities to customers of all backgrounds. For Marcus, however, the most important measure of progress wasn't happening in boardrooms or courthouses, but in his own home. The day Zara laughed freely again for the first time since the incident, spinning in a new dress for her rescheduled recital, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road to healing would be long, but watching his daughter reclaim her joy gave him hope that the journey, however difficult, would ultimately lead to a better destination, not just for Zara, but for all the children who would come after Sarah. 6 months after the incident at Pinnacle Department Store, Zara Taylor stood backstage at the Peachtree Community Arts Center, dressed in a beautiful teal gown with crystal accents that caught the light as she moved. Her fingers nervously traced the small butterfly pin on her collar, not the original crystal hairpin that had started everything but a similar design. Her father had specially commissioned from a local black jewelry artist. "You ready, Butterfly?" Marcus asked, kneeling to her eye level. The nickname held new significance, now symbolizing not just his enduring affection, but also the remarkable transformation they had both undergone. Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself with the techniques Dr. Washington had taught her for managing anxiety. "I think so," she said, her voice small but determined. "What if I make a mistake?" Marcus smiled gently. "Then you'll keep playing just like we practiced." "But you won't make a mistake. You've worked so hard for this moment." The piano recital had been postponed for months while Zara worked through the trauma of her experience at Pinnacle. There had been days when she refused to leave the house, nights plagued by nightmares, and moments when Marcus wondered if his bright, confident daughter would ever fully return to him. But through consistent therapy, family support, and her own remarkable resilience, Zara had gradually reclaimed her sense of security and joy. Now, as she walked onto the stage to polite applause, her back straight and her chin lifted, Marcus felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to his eyes. Vanessa, seated beside him, squeezed his hand in silent understanding. As Zara began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, her small fingers moving with precision and feeling across the keys, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The lawsuit against Pinnacle had been settled 3 months earlier, not with the private agreement and non-disclosure terms the company had initially sought, but with a groundbreaking consent decree that established new standards for, quote, retail security practices. Under the terms of the settlement, Pinnacle committed to comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, regular independent audits of security interventions by race and gender community oversight committees in each market, and transparent public reporting of results. The financial settlement was substantial, $8 million, but more significant were the structural changes Pinnacle agreed to implement across all its stores nationwide. These reforms hadn't come easily. Initial negotiations had broken down when Pinnacle's representatives insisted on confidentiality provisions that would have prevented Marcus from discussing the case publicly. "We're not interested in taking your money and disappearing," Sarah Chen had told them bluntly during one particularly tense meeting. "Either you commit to real verifiable change, or we go to trial and let a jury decide what your discriminatory practices are worth." Faced with the prospect of damaging public testimony and potentially even larger damages, Pinnacle's board had finally agreed to the comprehensive settlement terms. The case had sent ripples throughout the retail industry. Major chains, seeing the financial and reputational damage Pinnacle had suffered, began proactively reviewing their own security practices. Industry associations developed new guidelines for non-discriminatory loss prevention, many of them based on recommendations from the Taylor Foundation for Retail Equality, which Marcus had established using part of the settlement funds. As for Diane Reynolds, her professional fall had been swift and absolute. The criminal charges of false imprisonment of a minor had resulted in probation rather than jail time, but the court of public opinion had rendered a harsher verdict. Unable to find work in retail management, she had eventually taken a position as a cashier at a gas station on the outskirts of town. Marcus had seen her once by chance while driving to a meeting. Their eyes had met briefly through the window, hers quickly dropping in recognition and shame. He had felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a weary acknowledgement that individual punishment without systemic change would solve nothing. Thomas Brooks had fared somewhat better, accepting responsibility for his role in enabling discriminatory practices and becoming an unexpected ally in reform efforts. After his suspension and subsequent resignation from Pinnacle, he had reached out to Marcus with a sincere apology and an offer to share his insider knowledge of how retail security systems operated and could be manipulated to target PRARD, a sincere apology. Specific groups. His testimony had proven valuable in developing new industry guidelines and training programs. Pinnacle itself had undergone a dramatic transformation. Under new leadership, including its first black board member and a newly created position of Chief Diversity Officer, the company had embraced its consent decree, not merely as a legal obligation, but as an opportunity for meaningful change. Store layouts had been redesigned to eliminate blind spots that facilitated discriminatory surveillance. Security personnel now wore body cameras and received extensive training in implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. Customer feedback mechanisms had been enhanced to capture experiences related to respect and equal treatment. Most significantly, the performance metrics for loss prevention had been completely overhauled, eliminating incentives for stops and searches in favor of overall theft reduction through non-confrontational methods. 6 months after implementation, Pinnacle reported not only improved customer satisfaction scores among shoppers of color, but also reduced overall theft rates, proving that effective security didn't require racial profiling. The movement sparked by Zara's experience had spread far beyond Pinnacle. The hashtag number #ShoppingWhileBlack had evolved into a broader conversation about everyday discrimination, with thousands sharing their stories and demanding change across various commercial settings. State legislators had introduced bills specifically addressing retail discrimination, with several already signed into law. Major civil rights organizations had incorporated retail equality into their advocacy agendas, recognizing it as a pervasive but previously under-addressed form of discrimination. On stage, Zara completed her performance with a flourish, the final notes of Debussy hanging in the air for a moment before the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. Her face broke into a genuine smile, the carefree expression Marcus had feared might be permanently diminished by her trauma. She stood, took a small bow, and then rushed into the audience and into her father's waiting arms. "You were magnificent," Marcus whispered, holding her tightly. "Mom would have been so proud." The mention of Zara's mother, who had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier, added a bittersweet note to the triumph. Zara Taylor had been Marcus's partner in building Genesis Technologies and his anchor in navigating the complexities of being a successful black man in America. Her absence was felt keenly at moments like these, but Marcus took comfort in seeing her strength and grace reflected in their daughter. After the recital, as they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed a familiar face approaching Maria Gonzalez, the Pinnacle employee who had helped Vanessa find Zara on that fateful day. "I hope you don't mind me coming," she said, looking slightly nervous. "I saw the recital announced in the community paper, and I just wanted to see how Zara was doing." "I'm glad you came," Marcus said sincerely. "We never properly thanked you for your courage that day." Maria smiled. "I just did what anyone should have done. Actually, I wanted you to know that I'm working at the reopened Pinnacle store now. They promoted me to department manager as part of their new diversity initiative. Things are really different there now, better. And I'm part of the community oversight committee, making sure they stay that way." The news was a small but significant validation of the changes they had fought for. As they parted ways, Zara tugged at her father's sleeve. "Can we go to the store sometime? The new one. I want to try." The simple request represented enormous progress. Zara voluntarily entering a retail space after her traumatic experience showed remarkable healing. "Whenever you're ready, Butterfly," Marcus assured her. "We can go together." 2 weeks later, they did just that. The reopened Pinnacle store had been completely redesigned with open layouts, diverse staff, and visible postings about customer rights and security practices. As they entered, Zara held her father's hand tightly at first, but gradually relaxed as they were greeted respectfully by store employees and moved freely through the departments. In the children's section, they found a display of butterfly accessories, pins, hair clips, and small purses, with a placard explaining that a portion of proceeds would be donated to anti-discrimination initiatives. The butterfly that had inadvertently sparked a movement had become its symbol, representing both the fragility of childhood innocence and the possibility of transformation. As they shopped, Marcus noticed a new store manager approaching a middle-aged black woman who introduced herself as Patricia Williams. "Mr. Taylor, Zara, it's an honor to have you visit us. I want you to know that what happened here changed everything, not just for this store, but for how retail security is conducted across the country. Your courage made that possible." Zara, who had been examining a sparkly notebook, looked up with curiosity rather than fear. "Do you have the butterfly pins that support the foundation?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. "The ones my dad started," Patricia smiled warmly. "We do indeed. They're our best-selling accessory. Would you like to see them?" As they followed Patricia to the display, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey from trauma to transformation. The system that had failed his daughter had been forced to change, not just through punishment, but through structural reform. The pain they had experienced had been channeled into purpose, creating protections for countless others who would never know Zara's name but would benefit from her story. Most importantly, Zara herself had reclaimed her voice, and her confidence refusing to be defined by what had been done to her. Watching her now chatting animatedly with Patricia about the Foundation's work, Marcus felt a profound sense of both closure and new beginning. The incident would always be part of their history, but it would not determine their future. They had transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for change, a private pain into a public reckoning, a butterfly hairpin into a symbol of hope and resistance. And in doing so, they had written a new story, not just about racial profiling in retail stores, but about the power of truth, courage, and unwavering love to transform even the most broken systems. What would you do if you witnessed racial profiling in a store? Would you speak up like Maria, record the incident, or report it to management? Your actions could make all the difference in someone's life. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who need to hear this message. Comment below with your own experiences or thoughts on how we can create more just and equitable spaces for everyone. And remember, sometimes the smallest actions, like standing up for a child being wrongfully accused, can spark the biggest changes. Thank you for watching this powerful story of injustice, resilience, and transformation. Until next time, may we all have the courage to confront discrimination wherever we see it. This powerful story teaches us that racial discrimination can happen anywhere, even to innocent children shopping for a special occasion. It shows how the color of one's skin can turn an ordinary activity into a traumatic experience. The lesson here isn't just about individual racism, but about systemic bias that permeates institutions and becomes normalized through policies and practices. We learn that true power comes not from silencing injustice with settlements and NDAs, but from demanding transparent structural change. Marcus could have accepted private compensation, but instead chose to fight for reforms that would protect all families, not just his own. The story reminds us that accountability must exist at all levels, from the store manager who enacted bias to the executives who enabled it through incentive structures and willful ignorance. Real change requires examining the entire system, not just punishing individuals. Perhaps most importantly, we see that even the most painful experiences can become catalysts for transformation. The butterfly hairpin, initially a symbol of false accusation, became an emblem of hope and change. Zara's trauma, while never justified, ultimately sparked improvements that would protect countless other children. Finally, we learn that healing is possible, but takes time, support, and community. Recovery from racial trauma isn't immediate, but with proper care and systemic change, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Have you or someone you know ever experienced racial profiling while shopping? What actions did you take? Share your story in the comments below to help others know they're not alone. If you believe all children deserve to shop without fear of discrimination, hit that like button to spread awareness about retail racism. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and transformation that need to be told. And please share this video with someone who needs to understand how discrimination affects real families every day. By amplifying these stories, you become part of the solution. Thank you for watching and for standing against injustice in all its forms. Remember, sometimes the biggest changes begin with one person brave enough to say this is wrong, and that person could be you.